Hey everyone, on behalf of the American College of Cardiology and the Center for Systems Improvement, I would like to welcome you to this module of the EMS and Systems Care webinar series, taking clinical quality to the next level. I'm Tin Phalen, and the core content for today's webinar will be presented by Mic Gunderson.
Tim's going to be our moderator today. Very well known in the EMS and cardiology world with several books, and has had taught a whole lot of people working in emergency care how to read 12-lead ECGs. And thanks for being here today, Tim.
Absolutely. Thanks for including me. And who we are missing today is Tom Boothway. He is normally with us, but in case you haven't noticed, there's a hurricane out there, and Tom is the battalion chief at Hilton Head, South Carolina. So he is right there on the Atlantic coast. And Mick and I both, as former Florida folks, we fully understand this whole hurricane preparedness. So Tom and Kelly, you guys be safe. And to all of our colleagues and the millions of others that have been affected, you guys stay safe as well. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the fifth module in this webinar series, and it's going to be covering several more elements of the team-based clinical quality model that Mick has been drilling into for the past couple of sessions. They have been super meaty, all of them. This one is even a little more where the rubber starts to meet the road here. So we're getting a lot of details on ad hoc improvement teams, project charters, and how senior management actually factors into this and the roles for everybody in this quality strategy. Before we begin, just to remind you that if you are hearing us but you can't see us, in other words, you don't have the video, it appears in a pop-up window. And if you do not have that pop-up window, it's probably because you have pop-ups blocked in your web browser. So if you're not seeing any video, if you disable those pop-up blockers, that would probably take care of things. Now, for those watching live, at any time, if you think of a question, boom, go ahead and type it in. We'll gather those, and at the end of the session, we'll have them in front of us, or if you want to wait till the end to enter your question, you're certainly welcome to do that, but we'll have a Q&A portion as we wrap things up. And if by chance you're not watching us live, if you're viewing the archive recording of the webinar, no problem. You can send those questions, and you can send them directly to Mick at improvethesystem.com. So Mick, M-I-C, at improvethesystem.com. And Mick will see those questions, and he will respond to each and every one that he is able to. So whether you're watching live, whether you're watching recorded, you have a mechanism by which you can get your questions answered. Now, as I said, presenting today, the main content is Mic Gunderson, who, if you've been following along in this series, you certainly know Mick. He's the president at the Center for Systems Improvement, which specializes in elevating the performance of community and regional systems of care, specifically for those high-risk, time-sensitive conditions, as well as providing EMS system assessment, quality improvement training services. The American College of Cardiology, the ACC, it works with the Center of Improvement, and right now they're working on developing some EMS systems of care programs. Right as I turn it over to Mick, I will just point this out. I have known Mick for way over 25 years. We were both paramedics in Florida. I moved to Tennessee a few years ago. Mick has just joined me here in Tennessee. He's a few hours away, but I've learned that the mean IQ for the state of Tennessee increased 3 points when Mick moved here. So appreciate that, Mick.
All right, thanks, Tim. It's been a real pleasure doing these webinars with both you and Tom. So today we're going to go ahead and start into the video portion right away. So if everyone would just stand by for just a moment while that fires up.
This EMS and Systems of Care webinar series is proudly sponsored by the American College of Cardiology. And to start this fifth module in our series on taking clinical quality to the next level, we'll very quickly highlight a few key points from the prior modules as they set things up for much of what we'll talk about today. If you'd like to watch any of the prior webinars in their entirety, links are available at acc.org/eReportsEMS. Just scroll down to the resource sections of the page. In Module 1 of this series, we talked about quality in EMS and healthcare at a very high level. We talked about the connection between quality improvement projects and the scientific method and how they can be used together in something that has come to be known as improvement science. In Module 2, we talked about how healthcare provider organizations often have just one person taking on most of the responsibility for coordinating or managing clinical quality. In hospitals, it may be one person per clinical service line, but for EMS, it's often just that one person who frequently has a title of something like the clinical or quality manager. But unfortunately, with the many other responsibilities these individuals typically have, there usually isn't much time left in their day to do actual improvement projects, and that creates a bottleneck in the whole quality improvement effort. We then talked about how EMS agencies and hospitals could help alleviate the bottleneck by implementing a team-based clinical quality model that utilizes clinical specialty teams supplemented by ad hoc improvement project teams. We laid out the overall team-based clinical quality model as it applies to individual organizations. And then in Module 3, we talked about how the team-based clinical quality model can be applied to an entire region to improve its systems of care for time-sensitive conditions. We want to help you understand each of the elements in the team-based clinical quality model in detail, so you can adjust those elements as needed to make it fit well for your organization or system's needs. Then in Module 4, we got into the details of the clinical specialty teams element. We talked about how a clinical specialty team takes stewardship for a particular clinical area, monitors its performance, stays abreast of current research and best practices, and uses all of that information to make improvement project proposals to the senior management team in the form of improvement project charters. Now, once an improvement project charter is reviewed and approved, the improvement projects are then carried out by an ad hoc improvement project team. In this fifth module of our webinar series, we'll drill down into the details of the project charters, the ad hoc improvement project teams, and the crucial role of the senior management team. So let's get started with the improvement project charters. As members of a clinical specialty team, read the latest research journals, trade magazines, email discussion groups, listen to podcasts, watch vlogs, and hopefully have a chance to attend conferences related to their specialty area, ideas will crop up for how some of those studies and best practices might be applied to their own agency, hospital, or their regional system of care to make improvements. All of that information may also spur completely original ideas for improving how things get done. To start moving those things from just an idea towards a tangible action, the clinical specialty team will write up an improvement project proposal to the senior management team. And a best practice from the mainstream quality and business community is the use of a project charter for these kinds of proposals. Charters have a format that helps clarify a number of issues that the senior management team needs to understand to make a well-informed decision on approval. The format of the charter also helps planning for the project and guides the ad hoc improvement project team once it gets started. There's a lot of templates online for project charters and improvement project charters in particular. Just check it out with your favorite search engine and you'll see lots of choices. Now I'm going to take you through an improvement project charter template that's part of the Systems of Care toolkit being developed by the American College of Cardiology. But let's consider the format of the improvement project charter from the perspective of your organization's senior management team. What information will they need in order to make a well-informed decision? Keep in mind, this shouldn't be a rubber stamp sort of process. To help them in making this decision, they should be given some very specific pieces of information. They will need to know what process we're talking about improving. A process hierarchy description can be useful here. This is where we start with a very high-level process and list out the sub-processes until we reach the particular process where we want to make the change. I'll show you a specific example in a couple minutes. Then they will want to know what problem is in that process you're trying to solve. Perhaps it's something like we have a high rate of STEMI alert false alarms. But maybe the improvement idea isn't about solving a problem. Maybe it's about making something that's working satisfactorily now function even better. It then becomes something more along the lines of identifying what the improvement opportunity is. Perhaps it's something like we have an idea for a process change that may speed up our first medical contact to first 12-lead ECG time on suspected STEMI patients. Next, the senior management team will want to know what the specific idea for improvement is. Now, taking an improvement science approach to this, as we discussed in Module 1, we will want to state our idea as a hypothesis. Taking a simple example from one of our prior webinars, we might have an idea for training and equipping BLS units with 12-lead ECG electrodes. But that's not a hypothesis. In this context, our improvement idea hypothesis states what the thing is that would be changed and what we think will happen as a result. Using our example idea and restating it as an improvement hypothesis, we might say we believe that training and equipping BLS units to apply 12-lead ECG electrodes will decrease the first medical contact to first 12-lead time interval on STEMI patients when the BLS unit arrives before the ALS unit. Now, there may be more details behind the idea and the proposed change, but it gets the main idea of the proposed change and expected results across effectively. It can also be useful to explain to the senior managers the potential consequences of leaving things as they are now. Something that may be obvious in some improvement hypothesis statements and not so obvious in others is an explicit explanation of how the proposed change is expected to benefit customers. And in this context, we're talking about process customers, the people and organizations downstream whose needs are impacted by your actions. In clinical improvements, the patient is the most important process customer. In this case of the BLS 12-lead electrodes idea, the ALS crew is also a process customer. The ALS crew needs to identify possible ACS STEMI patients and assess their 12-lead ECG as soon as possible. So the benefit of this idea to the ALS crew is having possible ACS STEMI patients identified earlier and reducing the time it takes to capture that crucial initial 12-lead ECG sooner because the electrodes are already in place. The faster field assessment process benefits patients by contributing in several ways to a shorter total myocardial ischemia time, which is associated with smaller infarctions and therefore better outcomes. Admittedly, this change alone may not be a huge leap forward, but progress is often the result of many small changes that combine to make a larger impact. There might also be some other reasons to do this project that may not have a direct connection to the process customers. Maybe there's a positive political, financial, or employee morale implication to the idea. In this case, perhaps the BLS crews feel somewhat disengaged in care of ACS patients. The BLS crews are excited about their contributions to a team-based approach in cardiac arrest care, but feel sort of like they're on the sidelines in these STEMI cases. This change will give them an opportunity to make more specific and measurable contributions to ACS STEMI cases. These kinds of considerations are also important for senior management to be aware of when they evaluate the project charter. So, now that the senior management team knows what the idea is, how it may benefit process customers, and any other reasons to do the project, it's time to consider who is needed or requested to be on the project team. That may be stated by position, like a member of a BLS engine company, or by the actual person's name and title. If multiple organizations are involved, as we're likely to see on a systems-level improvement project, including the name of the organization as well can be helpful. Next, we want to state the major milestones of the project and how long each of those phases are expected to take. Again, estimates are fine, and stating the timeline in terms of days, weeks, or months after the project begins will usually be easier to work with than specific dates, just in case the start date ends up being off the original estimate. And you can even list both. Now, along the way, what deliverables can the senior management team expect to see? Deliverables are the things you actually create. For example, one of the first things to do on many projects is getting a baseline on how well things are working now before the change is made. A report on that current level of performance is an example of a deliverable. Another may be a process flowchart that's based on observations of how the existing process is carried out in the real world rather than how the policy is written. Other deliverables might include revised policies or procedure documents, reports on completion of training that's introducing the changes, and some earlier preliminary results after the change was introduced. These are the kinds of things you can list as deliverables. These are the sorts of things that the senior management team should want to see at the various milestones of the project. If resources other than people are needed, what are those resources? Access to data, access to equipment, money, whatever it is, it needs to be written out. Estimates are fine, but again, they should be stated as such. Then, we have a section to track the status of the project as it moves through the approval and completion process. You might have a review process by the clinical specialty team as a whole, and then by the senior management team. Now, I'll be the first to admit that this is a lot of detail, but not only does this detail help the senior management team evaluate the proposed charter, it guides the person or group writing the charter on what they need to think through as they plan out the project. And once approved, the charter will also guide the activities of the project team. The reason for all of this is to establish clear expectations and clear accountabilities for getting things done in a reasonable time. Too often, improvement projects go on and on without ever being completed or coming to a formal end. At some point, you need to end the project, let the successful change become part of the new normal, and move on. That's why these are called ad hoc project teams. Ad hoc means that when the goals stated in the charter have been completed, the project ends. Projects should have a beginning and an end. Programs are longer term. Your project may be to start a program, but once the program is off to a good start, the implementation project part of it should end. So let's walk through a complete example of an improvement project charter. It uses that same template from the American College of Cardiology's System of Care Toolkit. We start with the project title. This one is a little bit long, but it does the job of telling the reader what it's generally about: logging and inspection of public access defibrillators during building inspections and pre-planning. The process section identifies which process this problem or opportunity resides in. The example here uses a process hierarchy to do that. It drills down from a very high-level category into more and more specific ones. In this example, we see that this is about a clinical process. The next level subcategory is for cardiac arrest. Under that, it's about bystander interventions, and finally, we get to the process for bystanders to defibrillate. This sort of hierarchy is not necessary to use, but these hierarchical categories can be useful for many things like organizing performance dashboards, filing things away for future reference in a knowledge management system, and even for organizing your various clinical and non-clinical specialty teams. Next, we have the problem or opportunity statement. This is not where you present the idea. This is about the problem or limitation that the idea will try to improve on. In this example, we see that emergency dispatchers don't have good information on where public access defibrillators, PADs, are located. This keeps them from advising callers where to get one that may be nearby. It also says that PADs may have depleted batteries and could have old non-functional pads. So in the next section, called the improvement hypothesis, the idea or ideas are presented in a hypothesis-style format. This charter hypothesized that when fire inspectors are doing routine building inspections, or when crews are doing routine pre-planning exercises, this could be an opportunity to log the PAD locations. This should result in having more PADs indexed in a database that can be made available to dispatchers during their pre-arrival instructions to callers. Of course, it assumes that such a database is or will be made available to dispatchers, and there's commercial products out there to help with that. The charter also hypothesizes that inspecting the PADs for readiness will result in fewer instances where a depleted battery, dried up pad, or similar issues cause a PAD failure. And as a result of all this, the charter says this will lead to more cases where PADs are utilized, and that in turn is hypothesized to lead to higher rates of survival for cardiac arrest cases presenting in a shockable rhythm. In the section for consequences of the status quo, leaving things as they are, the charter states that despite all of the investments made by the community in PADs and training, the devices will be underutilized. Next, we show the benefits we hope to see from this idea for specific process customers. For each process customer, we tell who they are, what they need or expect from the process, how to measure how well that need or expectation is being met, and what we think the change in that measure will be as a result of the idea. In our example, 3 process customers are listed. The first is the caller. They need or expect that they will be told by the dispatcher if and where a nearby PAD is located. We can measure that indirectly with a percentage of cases where a caller was advised of a PAD location. The charter authors have no idea on what to even guess for the amount of change they expect to see. The second process customer section combines an expectation of the cardiac arrest patient, the caller, and the PAD owner. They all need or expect that when they access a PAD that it will be in operational condition. In other words, it operates properly when it's applied. We can measure that with a percentage of cases with a PAD failure. But again, the charter authors have no idea what to even guess for the amount of change they expect to see. The next process customer is the patient. They need and expect that they will survive their arrest and not suffer any permanent neurological damage. That can be measured as a survival rate along with the cerebral performance category scores. Yet again, the charter authors have no idea what to even guess for the amount of change they expect to see. This is not optimal. Even a rough guess is helpful, even if it turns out to be wrong. Now we have the section on other reasons to consider for doing this. They list that the project provides another way that the fire department can provide value to their community. Next is the section on the team members. Several people and their positions are listed. A project leader and an executive champion are also designated. The executive champion is typically a higher-ranking person that is advocating for the project. In this case, it's the fire marshal. The proposed project leader listed here also serves on the clinical specialty team that came up with the idea for this project. That does not always have to be the case, but it sometimes makes sense. The project schedule section has the milestones and timeframes. This section of the template incorporates an improvement project outline called DMAIC, which is an acronym for Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, and Control. And it's commonly used in improvement projects, particularly those that are managed with the Six Sigma methodology. If you want to know more about DMAIC, this is something where your favorite search engine can point you to lots of additional information. They want to start the project on May 1st and expect the measure phase will be completed in 12 weeks. If that holds, that phase would be completed on June 1st. The define phase of the DMAIC process was actually covered by the charter document itself, so it's not listed here. The development of the charter is the define phase. It defines the problem or opportunity to be addressed by the project. Completion time estimates are given for the other phases as well. Now for the all-important deliverables section. The measure phase tries to establish where the level of performance is now, particularly if that information was not available when the charter was written up. This is pretty common. In this example, they do not have any current data on the percentage of cases where PAD locations were advised or on PAD failures. Fortunately, they do have current data on their survival rates from shockable rhythms with the associated CPC scores because they participate in a cardiac arrest registry. The measure phase will also look in detail at how current processes operate. Process flow maps and value stream maps might be used for this. The deliverables shown here are pretty much the same for any improvement project. They may need to be adjusted or edited, but starting with these provides a good head start to completing this section. Then, utilizing information from the measure phase, the analyze phase will then try to reveal other issues or problems in the processes and where else there may be opportunities to make a good process even better. There may be some surprises here. The team may find that the problems they thought existed are actually in some other part of the process. That may lead to different ideas for what to change. The changes you make to the process are also referred to as interventions. In the improvement phase, the ideas are actually implemented. Data is collected. It's compared with the baseline information to see if favorable change actually took place. If it did, that's great. If it didn't, it's back to the drawing board to come up with a different idea or consider concluding the project. The deliverable is a report on the impact of the idea. If and when a satisfactory level of positive change is made from the idea or a decision is made to conclude the project, it's on to the control phase. This is where several more key tasks need to be completed. First, the team needs to take steps to make the changes permanent if the results were favorable. Make them stick. The project might not have involved all parts of the organization. This now needs to be used by everyone. Policies, protocols, procedures, and training may need to be redone. The deliverable here would be recommendations or direct actions to make those changes permanent. Another deliverable is a report on how the team thinks that the improved performance that comes from the changes could backslide. In other words, how might this get messed up sometime in the future? While all of the insights on how the process works are fresh in the minds of the team members, that is the best time to consider this question and suggest ways to correct those backslides if they were ever to occur. The next deliverable will be a report on the overall project to the stakeholders. This may be at some sort of meeting where everyone will be told about the project, how it unfolded, and what the results and recommendations are. All of the notes, files, reports, data, etc. from the project should all be saved for future reference. This deliverable details where these items are stored, which may end up in more than one location. And this is where a knowledge management system for your organization can be very helpful. Again, a search engine can point you to more information on how to design and establish a knowledge management system to make this sort of information easier to find at some point in the future, which may be years from now. In the course of conducting the project and reflecting on the results, the team may come up with other ideas for improvements that build on the ideas tried in this project. Those ideas might become future project charter proposals. Those ideas are briefly written out, perhaps as a single sentence or phrase per idea in this deliverable. Lastly, the team should tell what, if any, plans there are for presenting this project and its results to external audiences in lectures or abstract at scientific meetings or trade conferences, articles for trade journals, or more formal papers for submission to peer-reviewed medical journals. The next section, on other support required, lists out things that the team anticipates will be needed to conduct the project. For this example, they state that the organization will need to put a system in place for dispatchers to access PAD locations so that information can be passed along to callers. I suspect that the purchase of a software product for this may have already been underway when someone came up with the idea for this project. They also state that a process will be needed to take the information collected on PAD locations acquired during the fire inspections and pre-planning exercises and get it into the system that will be used by the dispatchers to advise callers on PAD locations. The last section of the charter is filled in after it has been submitted. It tracks the time and disposition of the project as it moves through the approval process. And this is helpful for seeing how the charter review process itself is working. So now, that completed charter goes to the senior management team for review. When referring to the senior management team, I'm referring to the organization or department leader and their direct reports. The leader for this activity needs to be of high enough authority to commit resources and funds to support a project. And who has this authority and who their direct reports are can vary widely between different hospitals and different EMS agencies. But I suspect this group probably already has a regularly scheduled meeting to address other departmental or organization-wide issues. And I would expect that this group would include the quality manager, and for clinical project charter reviews, it should also include the medical director. In their review, the senior management team needs to consider project proposals from a very high level. This is where the collective experience of the senior management team comes into play. This is not supposed to be a detailed dissection of the proposal at this point. Right now, it's more of a reaction to the face value validity of the idea. That said, the senior management team needs to be vigilant not to reject something automatically, even if it sounds a little crazy. To foster legitimate innovation, a healthy dose of crazy ideas is a good thing. Many true innovations are a little crazy sounding at first. Next, the senior management team needs to consider if the cost in time, resources, money, etc. seems to be worth the potential gains. Some ideas may have merit, but the cost may be way too high or the chances of success far too remote to justify the potential gains. But before rejecting it, consider other ways to design the project that may bring costs more in line with the potential benefits. The senior management team also needs to consider how the project fits in with the organization's or system's current strategic priorities. Maybe you're wanting to place a big emphasis on sepsis in the coming year. Getting a sepsis care-related proposal that supports this strategic emphasis would be great. They also need to consider how the idea fits into operational priorities. There's lots of things we do in time-sensitive care that need to work very, very, very well day in and day out. A proposal that helps improve reliability or efficiency of those core operational priorities is also a good one to get. The senior management team should also consider making suggestions that could make the submitted project plan even stronger. Again, the collective experience of the senior management team can be a great asset here. Since the senior management team will be reviewing all project proposals, they will have an awareness of any other projects that are already in progress or in the queue, and they can then decide if this conflicts or maybe complements another project. When you have multiple clinical specialty teams and a bunch of ad hoc improvement project teams in play, a broader view from the perspective of the senior management team can see if the proposed project is closely related or represents an unintended duplication of the same basic ideas. So perhaps a couple of project charters get combined. Perhaps something proposed for one clinical area would also benefit other areas and the scope gets expanded. The senior managers also need to consider if the timing is right. Maybe the idea is great, but it would be better to do it at another time. Maybe a bunch of good ideas come in at the same time, but you don't have the bandwidth to support doing them all at the same time. Putting some on hold until the timing is better may be the best option. So, based on all of the factors mentioned above, and anything else that may be pertinent, the senior management team will need to decide on a disposition for the charter proposal. It might be approved as is. Maybe it's approved, but contingent on seeing some modifications. It might be placed on hold and revisited at some specified time in the future. Or it might not meet criteria for whatever reason and is denied. But on all proposals, try to provide feedback, positive and negative as appropriate. This is extremely important particularly on the denied proposals. You want to encourage as many proposals as possible. We want everyone to be thinking of ways to improve and to be submitting project improvement proposals. Our emphasis in these webinars is on clinical improvement projects, but as we mentioned in prior webinars, the team-based clinical quality model can work with minor modification for non-clinical projects as well. You really want to get everyone engaged in the improvements. Assuming the project is approved, the ad hoc project team composition is finalized and their work can begin. The project team leader will usually be someone from the clinical specialty team that already knows about the project and what the clinical specialty team and the senior management team are expecting. So now we need to have a project launch meeting. One of the most important things that the senior management team can do at this point is to make sure that the new team has a chance for a face-to-face meeting at that project launch. Most of the rest of their work can be done without everyone meeting in the same place at the same time, but to get things started, that initial face-to-face session is really helpful. There's lots of nonverbal communication that can be missed without a face-to-face meeting. Is everyone really understanding the project and details from the charter? Is everyone comfortable with their task assignments? Do people have questions or feel the need to discuss something a bit more? These kinds of questions and issues are much easier to pick up on in a face-to-face setting. The logistics of ad hoc project teams are also something for the senior management team to think about as they try to implement this team-based clinical quality model. While that first meeting of a project team should be face-to-face, most of the others can be in other formats. Synchronous meetings are ones where everybody meets at the same time, but they do not have to all be in the same place. Telephone conference calls are a great example of that. Taking a step up to video conference calls, we also get to see each other's faces and pick up on some of those nonverbal communications that can be so important. Video conferencing platforms can often support screen sharing so that what you're showing on your screen can be seen by all of the others on the call. There can also be a shared whiteboard and other features. All of this functionality can make for more engaging and productive meetings. You can also have hybrid meetings. Maybe most of the team is able to meet face-to-face and others will join by telephone or video conference calls. Then there's also asynchronous communication channel options for the team. People can share messages and documents when convenient. People can read, listen, or watch when convenient. An email is a great example of asynchronous communications. So are message boards and virtual team workspaces. However, to keep things moving forward at the desired pace, deadlines are very important. Commitments between team members become the glue. As a team member, you are accountable to the other members of the team. You're expected to honor your commitments by meeting deadlines and generating the deliverables assigned to you. If you run into issues that may cause delays, let others know. Ask for help when needed, but do your best to carry your share of the project. Conversely, be ready to quickly help when other team members need it. Work as a team. As the project progresses, each of the ad hoc quality improvement project teams should be required to provide regular project status updates. Most of these can be in writing. However, more in-depth reviews of the project, usually in a face-to-face or video conference meeting, are commonly conducted when the major milestones of the project are reached. These are sometimes referred to as Tollgate Reviews. The project team needs to demonstrate to the senior management team in the Tollgate Review that the tasks and objectives leading up to the milestone have all been satisfactorily completed. If they have been, the team is cleared to move on to the next milestone. If not, the open issues need to be addressed before going to the next phase for the next milestone. During one of the regular project updates or in the Tollgate Review, the team may need to bring up issues that are impeding their progress. And one of the most important roles of the senior management team in support of improvement projects is lending assistance in removal of these roadblocks to progress. QI project teams commonly run into problems that can significantly slow down or bring their projects to a complete stop. Sometimes removing those roadblocks can be outside the power or influence of the improvement project team itself. The team should explain their roadblocks and seek the advice of the senior management team in resolving them. When needed, members of the senior management team may get directly involved in assisting a team to remove those roadblocks. That may be as simple as one of the senior team members reaching out to one of their staff members to get them to cooperate with the ad hoc QI project team as requested. Or it may be more complex, like having the administrator or medical director working with a hospital's medical records, legal, or QI departments to get access to patient data. But once the ad hoc project improvement team has completed their effort, there is one more important step remaining that is vitally important. And it really falls more to the clinical specialty team that wrote up the charter and to the senior management team. The project needs to be celebrated. One of the best responsibilities of the senior management team in this model is celebrating the accomplishments of an ad hoc quality improvement project team when a project ends. Regardless of the project outcome, the team members should be publicly congratulated for stepping up to participate. The story of the project, from idea to proposal to execution and results, can be told in a way that helps everyone better understand the processes that QI projects use and to encourage others to step up and cooperate with future projects. Be sure to call out those who really came forward to help others on the team beyond their own assignments. That's the sort of thing we want to reinforce. The senior management celebration of a completed project also provides an opportunity to significantly influence the culture of this organization to support innovation. Innovation depends on people willing to step up to propose a project idea and see it through to completion, particularly when the project might not succeed. By celebrating projects that had good execution but did not get great results, the organization signals that making a good try is just as important in the long term as a project's success. This is because innovation efforts inherently have more failures than successes. If no one is willing to try out an idea because of fear of negative perceptions or repercussions if it does not turn out to be successful, few will ever step up and try, bringing the chances of making meaningful innovations in the organization to almost zero. So, there you have it. Clinical specialty teams come up with ideas for improvement projects. They write those ideas up as formal improvement project charters. They are reviewed by the senior management team. Refinements may be made. Resources may be allocated. The ad hoc project team is officially created. The ad hoc project team meets. It follows the plan in the charter, although adjustments may be made along the way. Milestones are reached, and the senior team gives feedback along the way. The senior team may be particularly helpful in removing any roadblocks that the project teams are getting held back by, as they find out about during the Tollgate Reviews. Finally, the project comes to an end with a final presentation. The output of the project team gets archived for future reference and use as needed. The final step is celebration of the effort. People learn from their project experiences. They grow professionally. They are already thinking about the next project idea. I hope this has been helpful, and I really hope it has you thinking about how to implement this team-based clinical quality program model in your organization. So let's go back to the live session for comments and questions.
All right, Mick. Thank you very much for that. That was excellent. Okay, guys. Remember now, if you're watching this live, you can enter your questions right now, and we will address those on the air. If you are watching this from the archive recording, then you can still get your questions answered, and you see it right there, Mick at improvethesystem.com, and he will do his very best to respond to all of those questions and comments via email. So, got a question for you, Mick.
All right.
So as we're kind of like drilling down right now, and you've you've put the foundation there, and you started to build on the foundation. Now we're kind of getting a little more tactical here, more task focused almost. So we just got a wide audience listening here. What would you say to someone who watched this and says, "Boy, I like that, but we just don't have the foundation down"? Is it something that they could kind of start almost with a project charter and use that to kind of simultaneously build the foundation while they're beginning the process of moving in this direction?
No, that's a great point, Tim. And we're kind of describing the way things work with a fully deployed and more mature program. And the transition can be difficult. How you get from where you are today to where you want to be at some point in the future with all of this in place. And so, you may go a little bit circuitous, and that's okay. And one of those pathways may be that you want to put together some specialty teams. You want to do some ad hoc project teams, but do you wait until all of that is all in place before you do anything or not? And something that I would recommend is looking at work the organization is already planning to do. Tom's not on the broadcast today, but I actually went to Hilton Head Island and I'm working with them to help implement this model with their department. And what I told their senior management team was that as they try to figure out how to make that transition, consider what projects they're working on right now. And one of them that came up was they're planning on trying to implement video laryngoscopy. It's something they're going to have to do anyway. They've already, started the purchasing process, etc. So by shaping the way they deploy the video laryngoscopes in the mold of a ad hoc improvement project team is where they're going to start. And they're going to kind of outline the plan for how they do that with the project charter. And even if they don't have an airway and ventilation clinical specialty team like they ultimately may end up putting together, or maybe tucking this under a resuscitation clinical specialty team could be another option. Even before they've done either of those things, they might just go ahead and write up the project charter and do the ad hoc improvement project to do this work they've already got planned. So that's how I would recommend you look at it, is start with the charter, do things as in the mold or the template of an ad hoc improvement project team, even if you don't have the clinical specialty team and the formal senior management review structures and all the rest of that in place. And maybe that's where you kind of get your first foothold, in climbing up towards getting all of this deployed.
Right. Well, I just would be surprised if that's the case for a lot of folks in a lot of places. And you just got to work with what you got. That gives you something easily manageable to begin the effort, and you can kind of build from there. So
yeah, and that's why
thank you.
That's why I emphasize work that you're already going to have to do. Just try to do it in this template.
Right. Okay, here's a variation on that theme. You've partially answered this, but maybe you could speak a little more directly to this. So data is a big part of this, right? And you want things to be as objective as possible. So like my last question was more like, hey, what are your thoughts on giving this a shot if you don't really have the system in place? Well, a different side of that coin is, what if you don't really have the data in place, the baseline data, or you have some data but the sample size is kind of low of what you already have, or you want to initiate a program but you just realize because of sample size it's really going to be hard to meaningfully prove something. What thoughts would you have for someone who's ready to do this, but for whatever reason, I mean, it's going to be hard to really prove what they want to prove?
Well, this is one of the reasons why I like the DMAIC format that's used commonly, as I mentioned in the clip by Six Sigma projects. And in that measure phase is where you try to get a baseline. And that's really important to do, even if it's a limited number of cases, not a lot of data, but some idea of where you are now so that after you implement the improvement idea, the improvement hypothesis, you make the change, how will you know if the change has resulted in a difference in performance? When I was teaching quality management, quite some time ago, when we were both still in Florida, probably riding backwards on engines, one of the things that occurred to me is different agencies were purchasing 12-lead ECG equipment and trying to improve STEMI care, is I would ask, well, what was your level of STEMI performance before you got 12-lead EKGs? What was the time it took from when the patient arrived at the door of the hospital until they got to the cath lab? How many cases where EMS thought the patient was having a heart attack did they actually turn out to have a heart attack? And get some idea of what that was so that when you then implemented the 12-lead technology, you could see what the change was. And it was very, very rare that I ever encountered EMS agencies that really had a handle on that. And you can kind of repeat the same conversation for missed intubations and capnography, for unrecognized hypoxemia and pulse oximetry, and the list can go on and on and on. And this, I think, is the benefit of taking this improvement science perspective, is a more disciplined approach to trying to do this and having a little bit better idea methodologically of how to deal with small numbers. There are some very simple statistical tools to use to deal with small numbers a little bit better. Maybe that's a topic for another webinar, but there is a way to do it. But bottom line, in response to your question, Tim, is even if it's a small number, get some sort of idea how things are working now so that when you implement the change, you have some sense of whether or not things really did change. Maybe they stayed the same. Perhaps they even got worse. That happens sometimes too. Remember the high-dose epinephrine studies? We found that it decreased cerebral performance post-resuscitation, even though they hypothesized it would make things better. So that can happen too. But if you don't have any idea where you were at the start, you have absolutely no clue whether or not your time and effort really resulted in any sort of a positive change.
Awesome. Thank you, Vic. Hey, I think we got time for one more here.
Okay.
So I'm a big believer in the second paycheck. We come to work and we do our job and we get financially compensated for that. But all of us, there are other things that contribute to why we stay in this profession. And you had touched on is that innovation is inherently, it has more failures than successes. And you made a great point there that you need to acknowledge and encourage the process, even if the results maybe didn't go as intended, or you, just as you mentioned with the high dose epi, maybe you successfully proved that was not the best thing. Could you just flesh that out a little bit? So some folks have initiated this process that you just described, and maybe they've done it 2 or 3 times. They've all been in the category of, well, that didn't really, our hypothesis really didn't go where we thought it would. What would be some real world concrete examples of a way that an organization could just meaningfully signal that that was a good try and that the organization genuinely appreciates that?
I'm a big fan of storytelling. And when I mentioned, the celebration and the report out to the rest of the organization, doing that in a storytelling format, I think can effectively address this question you raised, Tim, which is really important to get down well. And so imagine you did a ad hoc improvement project. wrote up the charter, put all the resources together, executed the different steps going through the measure phase and the analyze phase, and initiated the improvement, studied the results, and it just didn't pan out as you originally anticipated. In the storytelling, you would describe, that they looked at this, here's their cause and effect diagram, here's their process flow charts before the change and after the change, and here's the results they came up with, but it just didn't work out. And what you're doing here is celebrating that people stepped up and they took their best shot at it. They made a legitimate swing at the ball, so to speak. Because if you keep watching those pitches zing by, you're never going to get a hit if you're waiting for the perfect pitch and every swing has to be a home run. That's not the way to win the ball game. So you have to take lots of swings at the ball, try to have good form, do it well. And the interesting thing about failures is you learn from that failure, that was maybe not the right way to look at the problem. And it gives you an insight on how to try to do it a little bit different next time. And it might take several iterations before you find that special thing that really makes that breakthrough in the process. But you have to be persistent about it, and the organization needs to support you while you work through all of those good tries that maybe didn't pan out. That's fundamental to innovation.
Excellent. Well, we got to start wrapping up, Mick. So as I've tried to make very clear, I think I'm going to learn more about this topic than maybe any other participant in this. So I'm genuinely appreciative. And I think for me, it just helped to be able to put some more examples to it and to just kind of flesh it out a little more. So this today especially, I just kind of felt like a lot of things clicked for me that I've understood as we've gone along, but for somehow I just think it's starting to all come together for me. So thank you for that, Mick. And let me just ask you, final thoughts or comments before we wrap this up?
I really think the innovation part is important, and consider working with initially some projects that you're already planning on doing in your organization, but write up the projects using a charter template of some shape or form, and then trying to do it in the mold or template of an ad hoc improvement project team is where I would suggest you start. And another thing I'd also like to mention to people is, in my view, the production quality, et cetera, of the archived version of these webinars is a little bit better than even watching it live. I don't want to discourage anybody from watching live, but if you haven't watched the archive versions of any of these webinars, Tim and I are actually recording ourselves with the webcam, so that kind of gets edited in. Graphics with restating the questions that are asked are edited back in. Some of the pauses are cut out. So I would encourage people to take a look at the archive recordings and absolutely share them with your colleagues. And if you weren't able to watch the live version, certainly please access the archive version when we send out the link to that. So that's my closing comment, Tim.
Fantastic.
There's going to be information on the prior webinars at acc.org, eReports EMS. If you scroll down to the resources section of that page, you'll find links to all of those things. But I'd like to thank Tim for being our moderator today, and all of our thoughts and best wishes and prayers are with Tom and Kelly and all the rest of the folks getting ready for the hurricane. Certainly, absolutely. Now, if you want to get a hold of Tim, you can reach him at the email address shown on the screen. Anybody wanting to reach Tom, here is his contact information: email, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. Certainly using search engines, that gets you there as well. So on behalf of the American College of Cardiology and the Center for Systems Improvement, I appreciate everyone spending an hour with us to go through this topic, and that will conclude today's webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.